Speedy here, Bennu Studio Inks. Back to continue the series Tales from the Drafting Table. We're on episode 11 on the Wolverine Montage. Anyway, let's get after it, shall we? Um, and yeah, in my mind, I'm definitely still going color pencils. Um, for the final, when I transfer this, I'm picking out the paper right now that I think will be perfect to give me multiple different techniques I can use with colored pencils because I am leaving the door open that I may put a touch of watercolor in it. I can see a few places where it really nice anime type of sky background, and one of the best ways to get that is through watercolor. And there's watercolor pencils. There's every kind of color pencil you can imagine. There's some that are almost poly based. Um, there's and the brands. Oh my God, infinite number. Um, I go through a lot of colored pencils because I use it for my drafting. So when I draft for something that's going to a final, I look at it first from geometry and symmetry and then, composition, and then second, as I work on that and refine that, I start to see it in color theory and so forth. And rather than just have a black and white one and then transfer it to the final medium and figure out what the color needs to be or how the color needs to be done on the final, I tend to kind of do color studies with colored pencils while I'm doing the draft. So I kind of can already work out visually and mentally how I want to approach each like component of it to get the proper feeling. Like, one of the things that is cool about color pencils, though, is like I said, there's watercolor pencils, there's poly base, there's earthen, base, there's Conte crayon. There's a ton of different types, and each one has a kind of a technique that it's effective at or is, exceptional at, and each one has a strength and weakness. And me, I plan on using almost all of my color pencils just to do this color study because it's a little bit complex. So I may do it, like I said, a dab of watercolor somewhere near the end of this when I'm working things out. And like the difference in it, it's all color pencils, but like say the watercolor part, you can use the watercolor to make the whole thing softer. If you want to put highlights in, the watercolor pencils are actually a really great way to go. Because sometimes using like the poly pencils over the top of the more earthen crayon type ones um, puts a shine on it. Now, being that this is literally just a draft and it's not a final, I'm not too worried about that, but it can literally make a texture contrast where the watercolor part's so soft it literally feels like it really is a sky in the background, and then when you have like a more poly thicker kind of color pencil in the foreground, it literally is thicker, cleaner edges, sharper, and because it's like so opaque, it's almost like paint. It will literally make that softer background literally look further away. So it's kind of a cool effect. So there will be some places in this where I'm kind of practicing what I'm going to do in the final, where I want to soften it, where I want to harden it, where I want contrasting and textures, um, those sort of things. Uh, Common technique in color pencil is when you're working with distance is to use kind of a cross hatching and abstract kind of approach. I may do that in some places, especially places that are memories. They're not currently the main activity. So, like, say, I've got Wolverine from, I think it's issue a three, maybe? Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's issue three where he's got his down on his knees and his head's down and his hands are between his knees and he's just pretty depressed looking. Like, that would be a good place to put kind of some cross hatching background in there, but do it like really light. If that makes sense. There's a few places in here. Um, one of the things I intend to do to kind of anchor the vision where you're supposed to follow is using that contrast, those texture differences. You know, The eye is naturally going to go to the boldest, most solid, almost paint looking type images and bounce through that. And they'll scan the smaller, softer things um, as they're taking in that more bolder one. But they will naturally not sit there and look at all of the soft little lighter ones. They'll naturally drift to the next bold point. And so it's kind of like putting breadcrumbs down for the viewer. Now, I may experiment with that a little bit here while I'm doing the color study, because that's kind of part of what's going on when I do a color study is where should it be bold, where should it be soft, where should it be heavy, where should it be, you know, thin, where should it be, where should the contrasts be, where should the technique variations be, should I use cross hatching at all for that matter. I mean, it's kind of a signature of color pencils that things that become vague become cross hatched. I don't know yet, because really it's about how good it looks. And part of the reason I picked to stick with the color pencils is comic book art is very, especially from that era, was very heavy on black inking. I don't even think the artists necessarily like that, and I don't even think the artists always did their own inking. I think they did their drawings and handed them off. They went to get the word balloons and the inking and the color and all that separate. Some artists did it all, but not that many. It was an assembly line type of setup. So usually the guy that penciled it never even had anything to do with how it was inked or colored, unless he was already a really well known or powerful artist there, had been there a long time. So I picked color pencil for this because technically there's a lot of black. And my instinct as a fine artist is you just never use black. You try everything you can to never use black. You use browns and grays and use the shades of gray, but you don't use black directly. Um, and my instinct was to do that with this, but I wanted it to look like the OG comic books. And so there again, I don't. There is cross hatching. There is pen and ink style work, and there is cross hatching in this particular era. So yeah, I probably will do some cross hatching. Um, anyway, I think it's getting close to time to just wrap this up. Um, there's limitations of how much I can record at a time. So, and I didn't get too much into stories. The only story I can tell that's like related to this particular subject is I got my first book on color pencils and all the different ways you can use it and how important paper was and how important tools were, tool selection for the right techniques. I still have that book. I taught myself to turn it into a technique for my drafting to improve my final product. Like, you know, and maybe one of these episodes I'll actually show the book. Maybe after an execution, I'll show the book. It's pretty old at this point, but an invaluable book. It's also got a lot of stuff that people just, I mean, don't use anymore, too. It's got some obscure stuff. Also, the other thing is that, like, I do both digital and you know, old school at the drafting table, obviously artwork. And there's still some limitations that the computer, the digitized artwork has. That it has texture limitations. It's still, no matter what you do, gets flattened. I mean, it's just a part of the process in making the file manageable. I mean, I've played around with some ideas where it's possible for something to have the same kind of feeling it does to what's out in the real world, like the real texture of artwork. Um, like I said, there's a lot of programs that do a pretty good job at emulating it, but it's still flat. That's part of what's going on when you're looking at like real physical organic artwork and digital is build up. You can't technically build up in digital. Not really. I mean, yes, you can use transparencies and layer and get colors that way. I'm not talking about that kind of buildup. I'm talking about physical buildup where when you look at it flat, it has valleys and, it's got contour and texture, and that is a part of giving it its depth. And, sometimes you want to build up, sometimes you want to work very thin. And that doesn't translate digitally. That's, part of the why I'm probably still hold on to the fine arts approach. It's good to keep your hands sharp and your skills sharp, your mind sharp on the old techniques for in the event that when you are doing digital stuff and you're like, oh, I wish I could do this. You might take your time and one day actually figure out how it's possible, and then you can share it with all the other artists digitally. So it's like I still take the same approach I took to fine arts and real world, arts. I still take that to the digital. It's definitely trying to constantly grow, expand, improve, get it closer to the real. It'll never all the way be there. Nothing on digital can ever feel like having pigment rolling between your two fingers and sticking it on your thumb and smudging it and making a sun. That you can't replicate that in digital, Happy accidents, that kind of thing. Both have techniques. But yeah, being connected to the fine arts allows my brain when I am in digital to be like, okay, how do I replicate that technique? How do I make it look like that technique? And there's places like where what I would do in the real world, I can't do in the digital, so I do it differently, but it still gets the same results. So there's things like that that are pretty cool too. Like mostly when I do digital stuff though, I'm purely focused on animation and character creation and prepping things for 3D modeling. Um, and I mean 3D modeling as in CGI, but also, eventually, more with the 3D printer, but it's just not necessary right now. All right, I think this is a good stopping point. We will pick up tomorrow in episode 12 and hopefully get a little bit more progress. Actually, I did think of a story where I could share a little bit. When I was in high school, my freshman year, we had a pretty decent high school out there. It was a high school that had civilian kids, but it also had Marine kids, Air Force kids. It had all the branches. Army kids, the Navy kids were actually in their own school because they were a little further away. But it had all the bases represented there. It even had some of the NASA kids there. And so I don't want to give away what base it is or any of that. It was a pretty important base, so much so that we were isolated. We really didn't leave it. Um, so it's an important military installation, but here nor there. So we had a really good school because this is government. It's getting all the bells and whistles. It's got that many different branches of kids going there, plus civilian contractors' kids and NASA kids. It's just all that mixed there. So, so having an exceptional school also meant that it was stricter. We had more programs available and more diversity of programs, but we also had a lot like stricter stuff. And so examples, my freshman year, there was kind of rules. There was an art class that was for juniors and seniors only because it was technically a studio art class, which is teaching you how to function and operate in college studios. It's a prep college kind of thing. And and also that like we had to take a lot more tests. And if you were an artist, like I was an artist and I was into music and I was into theater and all that, if you're into all that stuff, you actually had to do tests. You had to demonstrate your skill your freshman year so that they could, or, in your orientation so that they could place you in the correct classes so that you'll get the maximum out of it. You're in the right place. You're not too far ahead, that kind of thing. And so, yeah, my portfolio alone, it got me into advanced studio art class as a freshman, and I spent all 4 years in it, which did help me get ready for what it was like to go face studio at college. That was tough. They're brutal on you, but I was kind of already built for it because of training so young. And then, yeah, high school studio art class. Our teacher was brutal. Taught us to have a thick skin. Taught us to adapt. Taught us important lessons like the one I mentioned about Mr. Lang, how he made me do Stalin. Yeah, an army brat doing a portrait of Stalin because I waited too long in class to pick what subject I was going to do for my that week's assignment, which was to pick out somebody to do a portrait of. I dithered and couldn't think of anybody to choose, and so he chose for me to teach me a lesson. You know, when you got a customer making demands, time ain't gonna wait for you to dither or be undecisive. You just need to decide. and I learned a lot from it. Um, but I was already being mentored by somebody, Ken. Like I mentioned, Ken. I was already being mentored by Ken. So, and he was tremendous at helping me to get better at just honing my drawing skills and having more control over my hand and not fatiguing myself and those kind of things. Understanding layering and texturing in drawings more. I wasn't getting that from my watercolor teacher. It was more like real simple, straight, rigid lines, geometry, and then go paint. And, that was it. So there's not a lot of like true traditional like drawing. It was more like architecture to get to the watercolor, and you didn't want a lot of drawing because you didn't want that to show through the watercolor. So, but yes, one of the things a story I can tell is that so we had everybody in there that were either juniors or seniors, right? And I was the oddball. But I showed early enough in the first couple of assignments. I deserved to be in there. We just mostly listened to music and did our artwork all hour and then go on to the next class kind of thing. Um, but inspiration. Because of being around all those seniors and they were like well practiced, they were older than me,